We'll go ahead and get started. But thank you everybody for joining us, especially if you just registered yesterday. We super love that. Thanks for being here with us. We know you have a lot of choices when it comes to your webinars, blah, blah, blah. We thank you for picking us, blah, blah, blah. I'm kidding. We don't have a frequent flyer program. I'm Meryl Vernon, and as you may or may not know, I am the field CISO here at Anecdotes, which is a GRC engineering platform. Joining me today are two of my fellow Anecdotes employees from other departments. We have Kat Bell, who is head of GRC implementation services for the client side of things, and then Connor Russo, who is head of our own internal GRC implementation. But I don't want you to fret, because this isn't just going to be an echo chamber where we point at each other and go, look at this feature. Isn't our stuff so cool? That's not the point. That's not what we're here to do today. In fact, we're not going to show you or talk about the product hardly at all, we promise. What we are going to do is we're going to talk about the changes that we are seeing, the trends that we're seeing, and the changes that we think we need to see GRC take, honestly, in order to kind of stay relevant. Which leads me to today's topic. So if you know anything about my background, you know I'm kind of the cloud red teamer chick, purple teaming, etc. And all of that was good and fun. But funnily enough, I actually started off in GRC. I started my entire offset InfoSec career in GRC almost a decade ago. And then I left, obviously, to move into more of the validation and exploitation side of things. But I didn't stop caring about governance and risk. You know, those are still important things. I only left because I really wanted to get closer to the operational truth side of things. And I kind of sat back the last couple of years, and I wanted to see if GRC would kind of just go away and get absorbed. Like, we had dedicated purple teams for a minute, and then they got absorbed and went somewhere else. Now they have breach and attack simulation functions. And I was going to be like, is GRC going to be automated? Is it going to be absorbed into something else? We'll see. And instead, so the opposite happened. It got a brand new whole rebrand and revival. We're all moving into GRC engineering now, which makes my little red team heart so happy. Because at the time when I left GRC, I was seeing something over and over that honestly started to break my heart a little bit. And that was where I would walk into environments that were technically compliant and beautifully documented. And don't get me wrong, ISO 27K and all this great, but still deeply vulnerable, right? We still found methods of bypass. We still got initial access. We still were able to execute exploitation and post-exploitation actions, which just kind of goes to show you that compliance doesn't always equal operational reality. A part of why I fell so deeply into purple teaming and validation work was because I know defensive teams are drowning, right? Ops teams are drowning, defensive teams are drowning, findings are going to a backlog to die. Everyone's overloaded with investigations and tools and operational work and policy enforcement, and nobody really has time to stop and ask, are these things functioning the way they are intended, right? Do we get what we expect, or do we get what we inspect? Very, very different realities. So somewhere along the way, I just feel like our whole industry accidentally started conflating proving compliance with proving operational security, and those are not the same thing. So if you've heard me speak at all in the last 8 weeks since I've been here, you'll know that you've heard me say something that I don't think enough GRC and security professionals in general really realize, and that is that compliance is an audit outcome, right? But confidence, right, an output that I deal in a lot in OPSEC, see assurance, is a security operations outcome. So I thought this was such a crucial conversation to have with these two individuals specifically, because we all arrived at the same conclusion from three completely different perspectives. In fact, one thing that I love and that I learned more and more the more that I was here and the more teamies I talked to was that a lot of Anecdotes folks come over from customer accounts. So these are two of them right here. I was like, shut up, used to be our customer and now you came to work here. I want to know more about that. So we'll start with Kat. Kat, please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us how you came to be at Anecdotes.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a GRC implementation manager here at Anecdotes. I sit on the professional services side, so I work directly with customers who are building out their programs in the platform. And I came into compliance from a very non-technical background, and I learned GRC on the job. So I started with SOC 2 readiness and went through that first audit, and then kept expanding into different frameworks from there. So by the time I came to Anecdotes, I had years running programs on the practitioner side. And I think that's a big part of why I'm here, because the more time I spend doing the work, the more I could see that the model itself was kind of broken. Because the more time you're spending just preparing for audits, the more you understand that you're not seeing things that are broken in between. So it was really frustrating knowing that things could be broken in between audits and having no real way to see it until the auditor surfaced it. And then at that point, it was already going to be a finding. So I was determined to find ways to ensure that that didn't continue to happen. And that's
Mhm.
how I found Anecdotes. So now my job is helping customers build programs that give them live visibility into what's actually happening in their environment so that they're not finding out about things, 10 months later.
Yeah, full agree. And I saw that even back when I was in GRC. I was, obviously I worked in risk and assessment, and they were like, we're going to prepare for this audit. And then after this audit, here's what we're going to do. But we never got to those things because like a year later, it was still like after this next audit, after this, I'm like, when are we going to get to the other work that we need to get to? Which just kind
Right.
of punctuates the problem. All right. And Connor, sir, you as well, Mr. Connor Russo.
Thanks, Meryl. I'm Connor. I lead GRC engineering here at Anecdotes. I started my career at Optiv doing third-party risk as a service. I was there for quite a while. From there, I moved on to Netscope, where I helped lead different audits, and it was kind of part of a bigger GRC team. Um, Basically, doing the manual collection of evidence, working with three, four people collecting evidence for multiple different frameworks. Um, you know, that was a very manual process. And then now I'm here over at moved over to Sierra where I ran all of our audits, ran GRC, and then, got introduced to Anecdotes, and it was, kind of a wake up that, it doesn't all have to be, manual work. And I started getting into the area of, automation, understanding what we're collecting, and, working with these other teams, IT, security engineering, and even R&D to really understand like what we're asking them to collect. Um, and yeah,
Yeah. That was something I saw as well, was like I would kind of get like I was in charge of like kind of coordinating all the evidence for our audits, and I would like pull in a piece and be like, "Oh, this is good." And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Where did this come from?" And they're like, "I don't know." And I'm like, "Well, who owns this?" They're like, "I don't." I'm like, "Then who turned this in?" They're like, "I don't know." I'm like, oh, like my first job is just to map who freaking owns all of this stuff. Anyway, we got tools for that now. We got AI agents for that now. But the point being, I think it's pretty clear that all three of us arrived at this conclusion. The model itself has to evolve, right? When the model is no longer serving the need, not unlike traditional pen testing, we iterate on it, we improve upon it, we develop something new, like purple teaming. But let me be clear on one thing before we move on. I do not think traditional GRC is useless, not by any definition of the word, right? I just think the delivery vehicle I think the objectives outgrew the delivery vehicle is really what it is. I just think as environments continue to change, I don't think GRC got a chance to keep up. So our first topic is kind of what brought us all here, right? How did we all get here? So Connor, I'm going to start with you because you're kind of living in this internally every single day. But from your perspective, when did it start becoming obvious that the traditional heavily manual, right, point in time approach to GRC just isn't scaling to meet the current need anymore?
yeah. So my time at Netscope was kind of really when I started seeing the issues arise. You're not really understanding what data you're collecting, what the auditors are really looking for. I spend most of my time just sitting in Slack channels or Microsoft Teams and, messaging people and reminding people every day. I was kind of more of like automating messaging every single day and spending all that time. And then, maybe you get the evidence and then you go to that audit call that week and you're missing something or a column or a timestamp or something like that. So then it just kind of restarts all over and you already wasted a whole week. Um, so when I was at Netscope as well, we ended up onboarding a tool which we thought would help out a lot. Kind of just gave us a new UI, a new way to bug people to collect the evidence. But at the end of the day, it was still kind of broken because you're still chasing people for screenshots. It was just in a prettier tool.
Well, I mean, everything's a crawl, a walk, a run, right? So like first it was you individually and like things getting lost in emails and spreadsheets and at least then you had a central watering hole point, right? Everyone log into the platform, everyone upload your evidence. That's an improvement at least over what it was, but not enough, I think. Okay, Kat, you come from the customer side. You continue to see customer environments implementing this or attempting to implement this every day. Does that resonate with what you're seeing operationally too, or where do you start to see, people who bring us these traditional vehicles and want to modernize where does it stop serving them somewhere along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. Like what Connor was saying is something that resonates a lot. So, you were talking about like bugging people constantly and having to ask for evidence or ask for information. And Meryl, you kind of touched on that earlier as well. A big part of my job when I was a practitioner was understanding processes. Like I had to become the SME on every organizational process because so much of my time was spent trying to improve it and make sure that the processes were actually being followed and putting up guardrails. But I think something that's really important to emphasize and something I see now that I'm, with customer teams is GRC teams are so small. Like it's almost always just a handful of people and they're responsible for everything. I mean, when I say everything, you're talking like vendor assessments, your audits, your policies, your customer security questionnaires, your security training, everything. And that's really important context because when we talk about why programs look the way they do and why we're stuck in traditional GRC, the answer isn't always that they don't know that there's a better model. It's almost always that the workload of running the program consumes the time that it would take to improve it. And that's what we see a lot with customers is they know where they need to be. They just don't know how to get there.
You see that all the time with a lot of ops teams that are super inundated, right? Everyone's so busy treading water. Even if you hire on a new team member to like take off of people's plates, they're like, I don't have enough time to stop what I'm doing to even train you up on how to do what I'm doing. And okay, don't get me wrong. We all harp on this on social media a lot, like stuck in manual evidence collection, stuck in spreadsheets. It's like people are like, that really can't be a modern day GRC analyst's life. But honestly, it really is. And I feel like it still really is. Like it really still is just
Yeah.
hi, did you get me that screenshot I needed? Great, thanks. Even when I was an assessor, again, almost a decade ago, we had an entire internal audit team, right? Filling out our questionnaires and sending out our stuff to our third parties and customers who needed it. But like, it was still InfoSec's job to coordinate all of that for our own internal compliance. And I was but one compliance person on an InfoSec team of 5. So I definitely still felt that pain. I don't think teams are stuck in these models because they're lazy. I don't think it's because they don't want to, increase their operational maturity. I think it's just because we kept layering on more and more obligations and middleware onto a fundamentally manual process already when the systems themselves became more dynamic and ephemeral. So that leads us beautifully into what broke. What broke? Operational reality. Okay. I think the piece that a lot of orgs are wrestling with right now is that the environment changes faster than the audit cycle, right? So cloud is elastic, identities are non-human, AI is non-deterministic, everything is fluid and frequently changing and spinning itself up and down, and you can assume your own roles and permissions now. And I feel like the sprawl is everywhere. I feel like even all the orchestration and posturing tools we have don't do a great job at getting us true visibility just because everything is so difficult to keep track of now. Your attack surface, that's why there's an entire attack surface category of tools now. So as everything continues to go more continuous and shift left, I feel like everything but GRC has been doing that. So, if we're getting rebranded as the trust and assurance department at a lot of orgs, then why is GRC the least engineered part of what we do? This is not really my question, it's more of a rhetorical, unless someone has an answer. Anyone have an answer to my rhetorical question? Why is GRC the least engineered thing that we do? Anyone want to touch that one?
There's no bandwidth.
So it's a people problem because honestly, we're all letting people go the more AI driven tools that we've got. So do you think we still need to keep those people in the loop in order for these GRC programs to truly evolve?
Ooh,
Ooh,
that's a tough question.
I'll go to Connor first since you just did some talking.
Well, to that, I also think it's, with, to Kat's point, it's very small teams. Most GRC teams I've been on, last two have definitely been very small, and even here. And you usually just go from one audit to the next. You know, you go from your SOC 2 audit to your ISO audit and your PCI audit, and if you're doing FedRAMP, it just kind of all adds to it. So there's not really much room in between to do a lot of the engineering work and, to build off of that.
And tell me if this is true. Even if the want was there, even if you were there you are, POV, sitting on a GRC team, and you want an engineer, and you go, "Hi, can we have an engineer to help us modernize?" I feel like the engineers are going to laugh you out of the room because they've got so many other high priority items they have to focus on. Do you feel like that's true?
That's definitely true. And it even is true for when you're collecting evidence, they don't really take it seriously and they get back to you when they can, which is sometimes days later.
Yeah.
It's definitely if it's not coming from the top, then you might not even get their attention.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, engineers hear GRC and go, ew, I want no part of that. And GRC people hear engineering and go, oh my God, I don't understand or have the technical expertise for that. But I think we all have to accept that even GRC analysts, which today are a decently administrative function, right, compared to all the other disciplines around you in cybersecurity programs. But I think that's going to change. I think GRC analysts are going to have to get more technical, right? If nothing else, they're going to get engineers to help them build these things up, not unlike CAT, and then they're going to need to take over managing the solution themselves. They're going to kind of go the way of cyber solutions managers here pretty soon. So in that vein, Kat, you came from the customer side before coming over here to a vendor. Shade, we all did it. We all get hated on for it. But now you're helping organizations actually operationalize this every day. So does this resonate with what you're seeing? Like, where was the friction actually showing up for customer teams, and how do they kind of overcome it to get the buy-in to start implementing something like what we've got?
Yeah, so I think the biggest point of friction is just the absence of a feedback loop. Because in a traditional like audit prep model, the only moment you're really able to investigate what's actually happening in your environment is during the audit itself, because you're getting those requests, you're pulling that evidence, you're getting screenshots from people, and then you're like, what the heck is this? And that's so if a control's been failing for 4 months, if there's drift, if there's a widening gap, if a process that's documented isn't actually being followed, you don't find out until the auditor asks for it, or, that could be 4, 5, 10 months later. And by that point, it's kind of too late. I mean, you can still fix it, but it's already a finding, and nobody likes findings. Our business development people don't want to hear about findings, right?
Findings are
So
okay as long as they don't become poems. Then they're a problem. Then they're everybody's
exactly.
problem.
But I think visibility is such a huge area of friction because you don't know what's true at any given point. Like you can't govern a dynamic environment with static signals. So point in time attestations tell you what was true when the screenshot was taken, but they don't tell you anything about what happened the week after that.
My
And
woman, you just said three things that I love that you said. One, you said a feedback loop. So I want to double click on that here in a minute. Two, you said static point in time artifacts do not reflect dynamic systems, right? And then you said, God, you said something else. I just forgot. But what you said was that something that OffSec figured out a long time ago, right? They figured out that you can't continue to keep things episodic and super manual, right? You need that continuous validation piece. You need that continuous feedback loop piece. We have feedback loops in every other discipline, I feel like, in a cybersecurity program. And that so those had feedback loops, and now they're moving on the way of getting more and more advanced with it. But GRC is just coming into the era of, oh, feedback loops. We should get some of those. So please tell the good people listening here today, if they had a good feedback loop working with their GRC teams and the more technical disciplines, what could that look like? How should it be helping you?
I think I want to give a great example, and it's
Mhm.
still going to answer your question, but I'm pivoting a little bit.
Yes.
So many times we'll work with a customer and they'll be like, our program is working, right? We're good. And then once you set up the live monitoring rules and you have live data and you set up those rules to be aligned with their policies and what they say they're actually doing, and gaps start coming to the surface, they're like, oh, we're not doing so good there, are we? But then they can immediately address it, which is so
Mhm.
nice because then, it's not coming up during the audit. So it's not like a stressful, horrible time. You're seeing it and you can actually come up with a plan in that moment to remediate it.
But a lot of people don't care, like Connor said, to take the people away to dedicate these time and resources to these problems until it's a problem, right? It's a nice to have before the audit, and then it's a, oh crap, we need to have that during the audit. So proactive measures are a pain, but you need to do them, people. Let your people do the things, right? If you don't make time for your wellness, you will be forced to make time for your illness. It applies to your ops too. Connor, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, to that, I also think that, GRC people are actually, very experienced, very knowledgeable. We have, you know, we know a lot about the tool sets internally and how all the teams work. So, when you're discovering those gaps during the audit, after the audit, work with those teams, provide them with, you know, um, you kind of like a guide or like how to do something, what tools to use, provide them with what's the word I'm looking for here?
The guidance.
Guidance. Yeah,
Okay.
provide them with guidance on, how to fix that, how to implement something, maybe a story or, like a way you fixed this or implemented this in a past role at another company. You know, don't just be stuck collecting evidence from other people or just slacking people all day. Like that's kind of where the role needs to go into is actually guiding the teams on how to safely, implement controls.
Yeah, yeah. And, Kate here in the chat just said something so poignant, right? Kind of putting on our threat modeling hats. It's yes. And when the problems show up, suddenly the question is, why didn't we try to prevent this? It's a never-ending loop. It's like, well, we brought it to your attention and you didn't think it was worth your time to solve at that time. So again, in OPSEC, in DevSecOps, we've already seen this, right? We went from, oh, well, we'll build it 2 weeks before go live. We'll pen test it. We'll have way too many findings for us to get through. We'll publish it anyway and get to it later. Oh, wait, those things go to a backlog to die. They're getting birthdays. For GRC, I think that just kind of looks like, again, breaking open these silos early, getting teams on the same call, cross-collaborating and saying, hey, we work in OffSec, we validate things. Hey, we work on defense. We secure these things and write these detection rules. Well, we work in compliance and we just want to make sure that what's expected of us has been properly implemented and we can track its health in real time. That is how you get a feedback loop going before it's just, static and asynchronous testing in QA testing or getting the regulatory pen test and calling it, oh, good, we checked all the boxes. Because I don't feel like GRC professionals got into this field because they dreamt of spending their lives chasing down evidence and bugging people and being the more hated people in the room than red teamers. And trust me, I know how that feels. I feel like we all got into this part of the business to understand the risk, right? To improve the trust, to understand what the attack surface is and say, if you move forward with this decision, you are operating at such and such a risk appetite, or you can dial it back a bit. But somewhere along the way, the highly skilled people became human middleware between disconnected systems and processes. Hi, do you own the system? Okay, do you own the system? Okay, do you? Okay, great. Can you approve this decision? Okay, no. Who can get me the screenshot? Like, no one wanted that to be their lives. And we certainly didn't get into cyber, which is supposed to be a pretty sexy industry, to do stuff like that. But I feel like the philosophy executive-wise almost became, if it's broken, like Kat said, it'll come out in the audit and then we'll fix it. But you use times of peace to prepare for times of war, right? We never want to pen test during an active breach incident. That's kind of silly. You pen test ahead of time so you can fix the stuff before it actually becomes a production problem. And I feel like GRC teams haven't gotten the permission to kind of take those steps yet. And I really wish more GRC leaders would let their teams start doing stuff like that. Because I have seen, like I said, gorgeously documented environments that I still bypassed. And I actually heard something shocking from a real person recently at a conference I was just at 2 weeks ago. They actually said to me, I am compliant before I am secure. And that broke my heart because honestly, I see it. I see that we are just getting what we need to support this narrative to show that we've done what the regulatory framework requires, but we haven't actually asked ourselves, is that enough operational security for us? And how well and to what granular degree can we check on these things? Again, you get what you inspect, not what you expect. If you're banking on what you expect, you're going to be the thing China breaches tomorrow. And that drift isn't malicious, right? That drift is just entropy and it's just, it's sprawl. Okay, this brings us beautifully into our next point. So the inflection point, right? We're all here to make a case for GRC engineering. We're all here to get you to believe in continuous controls monitoring, CCM. So why? Why now? Why is now the time to adopt this mindset? And I think that's because honestly, GRC automation was a great step, right? We have GRC automation tools. There's vendors out there doing that. That was a super necessary step, like Connor mentioned. It took us out of super static processes and put us only into moderately static processes. But I don't think that was enough. It reduced some operational burden, but it didn't get us to a really good operating state. I think that evolution stopped halfway. So today, we can certainly hyper collect all the evidence we want, but the question remains, do we fully trust it? Or just because it was true 2 weeks ago, is it still true today? And you don't know, because in some cases, right, accelerating the top-down checkbox mentality, if all you do is automate requests faster, you're still fundamentally operating from a model that assumes that controls are static, environments are stable and they never change. You only change it once the cab approves it, and the proof can be established periodically. But modern infrastructure doesn't behave that way anymore. Cloud messed that up, and AI messed it up even farther. So, Kat, from your perspective, where do you see this affecting operational reality? Why is checkbox compliance no longer going to keep up?
I like the term operational reality because that kind of ties everything together, right? Because it's not what you think is happening, it's what's actually happening in your environment. You know, your compliance posture on paper doesn't always reflect operational reality. But when you have continuous control monitoring, you can actually, you know, I'm going to shift. It stops being a binary like pass fail type rating and it starts to become measurable metrics. And you mentioned security being like a sexy field. I don't think anybody in GRC envisioned themselves being the person chasing down screenshots. But when you
I
have
did when I was
continuous,
little. I was like, God, I just want to chase screenshots forever. Anyway, continue.
that's my dream. But when you're actually tracking control effectiveness and you're seeing where drift is happening and you're understanding how quickly gaps are getting remediated, that's data. Sorry, that's data that you can actually use to make decisions and improve your program. And then you become not the person who's chasing down screenshots, but the person who can use that data to actually inform improvements in your program. And GRC professionals are typically really good communicators. And so being able to get buy-in, but also have the metrics to back you up is amazing.
I mean, they're great communicators. They have insane attention to detail. These people do better work than like financial forensic detectives, I swear. Um, Empower them with the details and the evidence to be super lethal. That's ideal. So Nathaniel said something that just punctuates your point. He said, in his opinion, the issue weakness is that folks are not implementing what they say they are implementing. I'm like, that's exactly the point. If I see a questionnaire, I'm like, I don't believe any of this. This is all happy talk. This is all I swear I'm doing it talk. Show me the pen test. Show me. I used to say, show me the SOC 2, but now I don't believe the SOC 2 anymore. I want to see the damn thing operationally. If I walked in to a pen test readout and I said, trust me, I hacked you, and I had no evidence to back it up, I would get laughed out of that room. Connor, what about you? What is the state of operational reality as you've seen it?
Yeah, I think there's another layer to this as well. You can have automation in place, you can be collecting, the evidence, you can have you can have, you know, it built in the policy, have people responsible for it, but then when you actually have like the continuous monitoring going on and you're collecting evidence, I've experienced this where like we had something in place, pass it off to, let's say, HR, they had someone responsible for it. That one person may be out or maternity leave, that's something that GRC is just not keeping track of all the time. And, if you have a tool that, implemented for continuous monitoring, that will surface through the week that like, it's pulling in info that, a background check wasn't conducted on someone, that's like the engineering part, the continuous monitoring part that you're surfacing that, then you can go fix that, go to HR, be like, hey, what happened? Like, this gap was detected, background check wasn't conducted, security awareness training wasn't conducted, how could we fix that? And then, take that next step, like here, you can do this, provide them guidance on how to fix that. And then, that's going on throughout the year, not just during the audit cycle when you got the report that said 4 or 5 people didn't do their training or didn't accept or acknowledge the code of conduct.
Yeah, I feel like the user experience for the rest of the FTEs for like the GRC side of things is really just the person slacking them, hey, do your security awareness training. Hey, do your security awareness training. Hey, please do it by next Tuesday. I need you to do your security awareness training. They don't really understand like the why or the motivation. Again, like we understand threat actor behavior. They don't understand the GRC analyst behavior of like why we ask for these things and why we need these things to get done. And so they just kind of become avert to being part of the process to make it happen. But when someone comes to me for advice, a department, they're like, hey, OffSec, this is a problem. What should we do? I go, I don't know what you should do. They go, why not? I go, because in order to advise you on what you should do, I need to know where the question came from, what the current process is, where it's breaking down, like the where you are, where you were, and where you want to go, right? I can't advise on any of that without having the full story. Otherwise, I'm just throwing a dart at whatever random advice board and hoping something sticks. So something Kat said I want to double click on is that you need to be able to use your data sources and the things that support compliance automation to inform better decision making. And that is so crucial because one of the only things, the only factors that separate tiers like 0, 1, 2, and 3 maturity in any discipline of cybersecurity, OPSEC, security engineering, detections engineering, et cetera, is honestly the first step between 0 and 1 is more continuous, right? Make it less episodic, get a more continuous cadence going. The next thing is more context, more organizational context. Don't use what applies to everybody else. Use what applies to you. So more continuous, more context. And then the thing that's going to take that and make it go from just being data to being intelligence is whether or not it can inform better decision making. If it can inform and help shape your adaptability, right? That pillar of resilience we all want to ignore for contain and prevent, right? No one focuses on adaptability, but that's a very, very big piece. If you can use something to inform your adaptability, then that becomes intelligence. And cyber threat intelligence fuels almost every other part of a security operations program except for GRC, but I would love to see that change. So I love that Kat said that. That's to me what makes it more of an engineering discipline, right? When you want to root things in trackable, measurable, granular metrics, like you mentioned, and when you can use it to inform better buying, better processes, or to close gaps, then it becomes intelligence. It can become GRC intelligence. It can become data controls intelligence. It can be all these things. Okay, so the shift from administration to engineering. I don't think this shift is unique to GRC. I think we're seeing it everywhere across every major vertical in cybersecurity, right? Like I said, everyone's adding more continuity, more context, more telemetry, more intelligence, and tighter operational feedback loops. Kind of weird, all these things that we accidentally mentioned. So, OffSec went the way of CTEM, right? So did vulnerability management. Developers went the way of CI/CD, et cetera. But large GRC largely stayed in kind of the static top-down, like framework first operating model. And I think that's why so many GRC teams do feel disconnected from their operational reality because they are still trying to take this square peg that transformed into a hexagon, into something concave, into something else, and shove it into a square hole. And we didn't adapt the need to meet how current environments honestly operate today. Like I said, governance has almost no concept of threat intelligence, which makes me very, very sad. We have very little context, very little environmental awareness, and very little operational telemetry flowing through the systems themselves. And I think the future of GRC is going to be the exact opposite of that, right? So we need an inside-out model, I believe, where, like Kat and Connor have said, the controls intelligence starts with the native operational systems and roll upwards into governance, assurance, and trust. So that's going to bring us to our case for GRC engineering. So Connor, when we talk about turning GRC into more of an engineering discipline, what does that actually mean operationally? What do these people and programs fundamentally need to change to stop treating controls like static checklists and start treating them like living systems?
Yeah, traditional GRC asks us to assemble proof. I feel like GRC engineering asks systems to produce it. And I'm gonna take that like build once, map to many, because a lot of these frameworks all overlap, like a lot. Um, the same control can often satisfy SOC 2 controls, ISO controls, PCI controls, there's a good and that's actually something, a little segue into anecdotes, is that helps you map to all of it. And it'll tell you like where that overlap is. Like these frameworks overlap 70% and 80% to that. The GRC team roles changes. You stop being a coordinator and start being a designer. It gets you more involved. When you start understanding, how it works, and you can kind of go help out the security team that's onboarding, a new tool, and tell them how to do that, or how you would do it, or how you want to see the data come to you eventually.
I feel like everyone working in security, even if you're just a security salesperson, wants to know the why behind something, right? Like when I first got here and I had no hard skills, someone was like, IP addresses have 4 octets. They go to 255. I was like, why? They're like, it just does. Can just accept that it does. I was like, well, but if I don't know why, then when you change it, I won't know where the change came from. And I made them go back and explain binary rules to me. They hated me after that. Bob, I still love you, Bob Amich. Thanks for giving me that binary lesson all those years ago. It still means a lot to me. But I feel like we don't give enough of that why. We don't want to explain enough of that, the ask behind the ask. Like I have to ask this and put down here because I have a process back here that kind of necessitates it. But Lindsay said something in the chat that I think is very relevant here. Thoughts on a path or a team path that members need to take to educate and enable their existing team, as opposed to hiring new people, to obtain the skills required to do more modern GRC. I feel like the mindset and theory is there, but obtaining tangible technical skills that previously weren't part of GRC's career path seems to halt a lot of teams. So I feel like, Connor, I want you to weigh on this one, but I feel like what you just said there with that want to understand where the business requirement came from and how it became a technical objective and how we implemented it technically, and thus how we can measure, report, and document on it technically, and making sure it meets that original business requirement, et cetera. That is half of understanding most of what we do in technical operations teams. It's simply knowing what the business driver was and what our constraints and limitations were. Like there's multiple ways to skin a cat and implement a control. We pick the path that makes the most sense for the systems we have, the people we have, and the business objectives and processes that need to work, I feel like. But for someone who does want to understand, right, who wants to be a more technical GRC person, what do you recommend? What can they do? How can they start being more of an engineering mindset?
I also think that, sorry, I also think that's like the more exciting part of the job is like instead of chasing down screenshots, you're getting more involved, you're understanding like what's being asked, why you need to do it, how to do it. And then, when you go to those audit calls, those weekly sessions, you can actually explain it and truly understand it and, even push back because sometimes, I mean, with my experience, sometimes the auditor, they don't know everything. They may have one way of doing things, and if you actually understand it, you'll be able to push back on them a little bit. And you don't have to coordinate. That's like a whole nother thing. Is like if you don't actually understand the data you're pulling, the tools you're working with, then you're also not only coordinating collection of evidence, but you're also coordinating getting people on calls every week, which is probably worse, honestly.
That was one of the first things I did as a purple teamer. I was like, listen, I have no objective. I'm just going to put lots of different people from different teams on one call and kind of let them talk and see what happens. And they're like, hey, man, what are you working on? Why? Oh, we're doing a piece of that. Did you know that we're helping you out with that? And, you kind of see like this beautiful synthesis happen. I feel like we really need to start including GRC on more of these engineering project and engineering scrum calls so they can be aware of what we're doing engineering wise and understand how that will eventually roll up into regulatory requirements. Kat, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I was just about to jump in. I think it's so interesting, especially because I came from a non-technical background and like all of this started to surface a few years in, like all the GRC engineering started coming up. And then I started to feel like I was being left behind by the industry I felt so strongly about. So I started diving into all of the resources that started surfacing around GRC engineering. There's so much out there now. But again, there's the question of bandwidth. Do you have the bandwidth to actually dive into all of these? While they're great to learn, and I think it's so valuable to understand GRC engineering, sometimes you don't have the time. So a few things I would recommend is sitting with your engineering teams and actually understanding how your processes work. I touched on that a little bit earlier. It's so important as a GRC professional to understand your organizational processes. Everything that's happening, you need to understand it. And if you don't, you sit down with those teams and you ask them questions about it so that you can understand it. And I'm going to plug anecdotes a little bit because it's really helpful to see the data. So once you have that data pulled in and you can look at it and you can understand, you can see the data behind the processes and you can ask the questions about it and set your rules so that you can monitor it and see where the gaps are arising. That's where you start to really have or gain the ability to make improvements and to really say that you're like moving into that evolving model of GRC versus staying in that traditional model.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like a lot of what we're seeing, oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. I'm not even kidding. What
You
was the
do have
last
a
thing you
good
just said?
question though. What actions do you recommend for small teams given typical GRC bandwidth constraints? Did we hit on that?
No, we haven't yet. Feel free.
I mean, my last two teams that I've been on, I was the only one to start it. I've now come onto another team where I do have, a coworker who's also in GRC, but I mean, he's so caught up on FedRAMP that it's really just me doing, our SOC 2, our ISO, and going from there. I would say, if other teams allow it, like start working with your security engineering team, your R&D team.
I remember.
If you can, ask for, read-only API access. Start playing around in Postman, pulling in evidence. Do you
And
want
if
to say
you
something
don't know
else?
what that means, start there. Google a read-only API access and what it means and why you should use it and why you need it and what it can help you with, and start there.
And
Yeah,
Postman.
pull it down. I
Postman's
mean, even
amazing.
vibe code it, like, get that API, start playing around with what data you can pull from your tools. I mean, don't get like read and write access, don't do that off the
Don't
start.
change any
You know,
tables in prod, please, or they have to send us in and it gets really adversarial.
yeah, I mean, just start with something easy, maybe, like security awareness tool, and then, pull down all of your users, and then check that against the user list coming from your HR tool. Um, and then you can even like vibe code if you have access to any type of AI, vibe code a script. Um, that'll tell you if
And
there's a gap, and then yeah, go from there.
yeah, I thought Grisk was such a great place to grow up, especially before I started pen testing, because it had such a wide exposure, right? It touches so many different facets of the business, HR processes, financial processes, payment processes. There's a lot of different things that it touches. And so for every single thing, I was like, oh, do we offboard someone within 6 hours of termination or leading? And I was like, do we do that? And they're like, yeah. And they showed me the records. I was like, why do we have to do that? And I wanted to understand what the equal but opposite exploit was for each thing that the regulatory framework required that we do. So I started learning about why and how we defend because of why and how we attack. So, for my advice to the GRC analysts out there, as a GRC analyst who made the leap to pen testing, um, to to first of all get the buy-in to start wanting to understand engineering things, right? Someone asked me the question, how do you get buy-in and permission for this from leadership? And it's to start treating it like an engineering problem. Engineering problems get project managers, they get budgets, they get timelines, they get, update calls. Administrative projects do not, I feel. So once we start changing our mindset to approach it like an engineering problem, you'll get engineering resources. But also just to kind of learn operationally why it asks for these things. And like when I only became a really, really good cloud hacker when I became a really, really good cloud builder first, right? I had to understand how to build and defend something before I could understand how to break it. And I feel like that's the exact same mindset we need to apply to GRC and the controls in GRC. We had a good question farther up that I just want to touch on really quickly because I know we're coming pretty close to the end of time. Someone asked, which department or business unit should GRC fall under ideally? Should it be risk? Should it be security? Should it be IT? I feel like we could ask 100 GRC analysts which department they sit in, and we get like a dozen different answers. I've sat in InfoSec. I've reported to audit. I've seen it report to finance. I've seen it report to the COO. I've seen it a variety of ways. But where do you guys think GRC people should sit? And if we were looking at the future evolution, right? GRC engineering, where should GRC engineering folks sit? Kat, you first.
Ooh, that's a tough question. I think I'm going to defer to Connor on that one.
Oh, come
Yeah, I mean,
on. In your
honestly,
ideal org, where would it be?
I can hit that. I think Kat, you can go next. I feel like it's the person that, or the team slash person that's going to advocate for you across the org. I've seen that mainly sit right under the CISO, the person leading the security organization, because they're heavily, ingrained and they're heavily involved in processes across the whole organization, and they can help you get buy-in. They can kind of be your voice. There's a lot of times when I bring problems up to teams that are not working with me, not, giving me evidence or access to tools and, things that I need. I go to my CISO, and he goes to them. He's like, well, we can't help you with the go-to-market and things if, we're not be able to produce this, and actually be compliant with these frameworks, because at the end of the day, no one's going to be your customer if you can't satisfy the requirements. A lot of these requirements are to have a SOC 2, to have an ISO, to, if you want to get into the financial area, you have to, have a PCI certification. So, you can also spin it from, this is a requirement to sell.
Yeah. I I don't know where it should sit, but what I'm going to say is depending on your organizational makeup, right? Do you have internal audit? Do you have BSOs? Do you have a chief risk or chief privacy officer? Or do you just have a CISO and a CTO? Like, it's going to depend. But I think whatever makeup you have, GRC and GRC engineering should be an independent third party department from the departments that it reports on. So it shouldn't be necessarily part of the dedicated security team, shouldn't be a part of the dedicated audit team because it's going to report on the actions of both of those departments, right? So I just think they need to be able to not like be reporting on basically to their boss on the performance of other direct reports of that same boss kind of a thing. So I just think that these departments should be standalone departments. That's not to say they should work in a silo, they should still be collaborative, but I think responsibility wise, that kind of frees them up and gives them the ability to truly give third party opinions and independent opinions on where processes are breaking down or where controls aren't being well evidenced or well implemented, and work with the engineering teams to get those things corrected. Okay, Kat, your turn. You have to answer now.
I'm going to piggyback. I'm going to piggyback kind of on what Connor was saying. It's funny because where I came from, I laugh because we fell under finance, and that was always kind of a struggle, like you can imagine. But I think the right place for them to fall under is going to be where you're going to get the best advocacy. Like if you have a CISO who really understands, what the market looks like, and also, the nature of GRC engineering and how that information is going to help inform improvements in your program. And that CISO also has like really great communication skills and can get executive buy-in. That's where you should fall under. I don't think that there's a right answer here, because in every organization, it's probably going to fit somewhere,
We don't want to give
like
you no
that. But
answer,
like,
but we can't give you the right answer.
yeah, exactly. It's so hard to give a right answer, but the advocacy, I think, is the biggest part of that.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a big part for sure. At my org, when I first broke into cyber and I was a GRC analyst, so we had a chief risk officer, CRO. The CISO was under that, so he was a junior VP underneath the chief risk officer, and then I worked underneath him. And in my opinion, that was ineffective because again, I'm reporting on the same department that I work in. So I thought the CISO's org should have been separate then from the CRO's org, so we could truly again report on those processes and that work. But that's just my two Bitcoin. Rob, who asked that question, or no, he didn't ask that question. I apologize. Someone in purple did. But he said, I'm so sick of being moved around in our org. We currently are in security after being in regulatory and then the application engineering space. Security thinks they know best, but focus too deep in the technical and not how to manage the work end to end. See, we need you guys because you guys have a holistic view of how it's almost like a data flow thing, right? You know the whole process front to back. The technical teams implement their controls in the middle, and you say whether or not those are efficacious. But, and this leads us into I think the last point we'll have time for, which is great. That is going to lead silos. Preach, Rob, louder from the back. You can be on my next one. CCM as the natural next evolution, right? Continuous controls monitoring. So not simply does this control exist? Did we document it well and change it once? But is it healthy? Is it still functioning as intended? How do we know what telemetry reports that? Who owns it? Who owns the risk? Who's the data custodian and the systems owner? And what happens when the environment changes? Does anyone execute a change without the cab truly knowing, or do they all go through there, et cetera? I don't think we need more compliance and evidence coordination. I do think we need controls engineering. Connor, like you said, we kind of need a lot more visibility. So the other disciplines in cyber, I feel like, honed in on the observability and the visibility piece like 2 to 3 years ago. So now they've got a shit ton of observability and dashboards and reporting and metrics and all these things. But like, again, very little on the implementation, very little on the mobilization side of things, emphasis on the visibility. And GRC is still catching up to that. GRC doesn't even have that visibility yet. So, the case for CCM, you need to make it more continuous. We've said that. We need to add more context. We've said that. We need it to inform better feedback loops to make it intelligent. We've said that. So from your perspective, Connor, what does the no, I don't want to ask that question. That's a stupid question. So from your perspective, Connor, the case for CCM, explain what it means, why it's natural evolution. I feel like we've already touched on that. Is there anything else you want to say about CCM and why we need
Yeah,
reportable, measurable controls, etc.?
I think, some people think of CCM as like faster automation when it should really be thought about of, the system producing truth continuously. right?
Mm.
So, that's a little segue into anecdotes, honestly, a little bit, because not only like are we surfacing data quicker, but we're also surfacing where issues arise, and understanding where those gaps are. And then that's like a natural path to, I guess, remediation and like program development and maturity.
Yeah, that's a great one. Kat, anything to add before we take one last question from the audience and do a wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think with GRC practitioners in our audience, we're probably preaching to the choir here. Most GRC practitioners are probably working towards getting to continuous control monitoring, and how you get there matters a lot less than actually getting there. So establishing your continuous controls monitoring really means like understanding your processes, understanding how the pieces of your program actually fit together, and getting to the point where you can pull live data and see, whether what you'd expect to be happening is actually happening. And then you can start putting up guardrails from there. So again, it's so important that you understand all of your processes. It's so important that you build a culture around GRC and start slowly but surely establishing buy-in from your executive stakeholders. And then, getting there, whether that means engineering it yourself or building it inside a platform like Anecdotes, the work underneath is still the same.
I agree. That was one of the things that pulled me over and got me interested to come work here, especially as a red teamer, right? Was that I treat everything like an engineering problem. I'm always obsessed with the data. So for me personally, the fact that this wasn't framed as an automations problem and it was framed much more like a data and assurance problem, not how do we collect better evidence faster, but how do we establish more confidence in the evidence that we do have? That's a problem that I'm passionate about solving. So we're going to take one more comment from Princess, then we're going to wrap up. Princess illustrated this beautifully for us. She said, with what I've seen with GRC engineering, most of it is geared towards compliance automation. Preach! Compliance automation, automated evidence collection, etc. The R is normally silent. I do not see a lot on risk management or risk engineering. So for example, if a control has been failing, this should dynamically shift the risk score of the applicable risks. When we integrate via API with Qualys, the data of the applicable vulnerabilities should be factored into those factors. Yes, it should, ma'am. So how is Anecdotes trying to solve for this? We did get an anecdote specific question. We weren't going to bring it up until you all did, but we will address this now. So how is Anecdotes trying to solve for, I guess, weighting those risk factors depending on what the data sources are actively reporting up to us? Does that make sense? Did I reframe her question well enough for Connor and Kat?
Yeah.
I'm still digesting it. Hold
Okay,
on. Kat, if you
Kat,
want to take a
have
stab.
immediate
I can
thoughts.
I can start, Connor, you can go after. So the nice thing about Anecdotes is everything is interconnected. So you have your frameworks, you have your compliance, you have your risks, but within your risk register, you can attach mitigating controls to those risks, and you can weight them against your risk. So your residual risk is actually live. So it's dynamic. It's being adjusted based on your controls and the live data that's coming in from those controls. So if your control is deficient, you're actually seeing that reflected in your residual risk. So the interconnectedness is something that's really like, I mean, beautiful within Anecdotes, and I love it. It's something that I didn't know was possible prior to coming to Anecdotes, but now that I'm here, it just makes the most sense. I can't think of doing it any other way.
So having the measurable ability to drill down real-time health of that control is absolutely a capability that you do have inside of our platform. So if that's something you're missing today, Princess, reach out to one of us and we'll help you out. But that is something that means a lot to me. So when I was interviewing for this job, I was like, tell me what you're doing differently. Tell me how you're different from your competitors. Tell me how you help them move the needle more forward, right? Rather than just simply pointing out more stuff and reporting on it, which doesn't help anyone do anything. If I can't answer the why, from where, to what degree, then I don't know actually how much harder I'm making the threat actor's job and thus how much I'm lessening risk without these answers. Connor, anything to add before I bring us home in the last 4 minutes?
No, I think Kat hit it perfectly, honestly.
It's freaking did. Okay. Well, if you've taken anything away from this webinar, I think we can all agree that modern environments have outgrown the traditional operating models for governance, risk, and compliance. Cloud changed it. AI accelerated it. complexity finished us off. It's always been there. So GRC can't survive, right, going forward as a purely administrative function in environments that are increasingly autonomous, ephemeral, and AI driven. In my opinion, the future of governance and risk programs is not going to be better paperwork, more evidence, and faster evidence. It's going to be risk and assurance engineering. We do need to engineer it because when it's engineered, it's trackable, it's measurable, people report on it, it's got owners, etc. This is what's going to make it an engineering problem versus an administrative problem, because ultimately, I think the organizations that succeed are going to be the ones not with the prettiest dashboard, because green doesn't always equal good if you've been to a recent Squid Games, but they're going to be the ones that can continuously prove that their controls how they operate in real time in their environment based on the data sources. That's all it takes. Not once a year, not once a quarter, continuously, operationally, with measurable confidence. That's how we get to confidence instead of compliance. Thank you for spending your Wednesday morning with us. If you stuck around for the whole thing, it was really beautiful. You all popping off in the chat with each other, that made my whole heart very, very happy. I appreciate you all.
That was great.
Yeah, if anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me on social media. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I don't know how active the other two are, but you can funnel all your questions to me and I will get you all answers. Otherwise, please join us for the next one. It was so great having you all here. Thank you so much. We at Anecdotes love you, and we'll see you next time.